Well, I guess I would start by saying that I didn't plan initially to be an educator. I thought initially that I would become a physician. My father was a physician in Puerto Rico, and I always thought that I would follow in his footsteps. And in fact, when I went to college at Marquette University in Milwaukee, I took a pre-med curriculum, and I even got myself accepted into a medical school. And then I decided, after a lot of soul searching, that I really didn't, that's not what I wanted to do. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that that was not really it. My father was, I think, very disappointed. And then I started, initially I thought I would want to teach in a university, and I was very interested in history. And I wanted to go, my major in college was philosophy, and I had a minor in chemistry. And I wanted to study history, but the history department didn't want me to become a graduate student. They said I have to go back and take I don't know how many courses. And I said, if I want to do that, I'd rather start fresh with something else. So I had never studied literature to any extent, Spanish literature. So I went back and I took all the courses necessary to get a major in that area. And then I went on and got a master's degree. And then I went on and got a doctorate. And I decided I wanted to work as a college professor. At some point when I went back to Milwaukee to work at Marquette University, I was contacted by some local community groups that got me involved in some projects affecting the Hispanic community in Milwaukee, which was composed of primarily Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans at that point, although there was a mix of Hispanics. But the bulk of the population was those two groups. And then I sort of got into boards, community-based organizations, and I decided to leave what I was doing as a professor of literature at Marquette and move over to the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, where I then, helped to start a new program to bring Latinos into the university. So it was more of an activist administrative role that got me into that. And then I decided to shift completely from my training in literature to education. And I became a faculty member in the School of Education, and I went through the ranks and ended up spending almost 18 years in the School of Education before coming here. Well, it certainly was a big shift from Milwaukee to the Bronx. I had been in the Bronx as a kid, actually. I had an aunt that lived, I still remember the address, 960 East 163rd Street, in a building. It's near Fox Street, and by Banana Kelly. And as a very young kid, probably 10 years old, I'd spent a summer here with my aunt, who was a beautician. She lived in New York for a long, long time. But in 1990, I arrived. I was very well received by then Borough President Fernando Ferrer, who provided, a lot of support for the college over the years while he was borough president. And then I got around to meeting, some of the elected officials and making contacts. But I had never lived in New York, so it took me probably 2-3 years to get out and get to know people. The conditions at the City University were very difficult because the budget was being cut. The students were protesting. It was, tuition had been imposed back in the 70s. For a long time it hadn't been raised. When I came here, that first semester, tuition was raised $100 by the trustees, and the students revolted. They took over the library. And then in the spring, we had a very difficult period here where students took over 3 or 4 buildings. It was sort of my initiation. You could say that was my baptism of fire. But we got through that, and And then it was even more difficult in the 1990s when we had a real major cut when the new governor got into the office. Overall, though, I think I found that there was a great deal of need and a lot of desire on the part of Latinos generally, Puerto Ricans and others, Dominicans and many others, to obtain an education. And this institution, for them, for many of them, for most of them, was really the only real avenue to do that, because most of them are not going to go away, they can't afford to go away, or the parents don't want them to go away, if in the case of some dependent students. So I was very interested in promoting Lehman College and raising the visibility, raising the quality of what we do, and making this institution become a real interactive institution with the community. And I think over the years we've done that. We've done that with, especially with schools. We have a range of collaboratives with schools, with high schools and with other schools. We train a lot of teachers here. And we even have a high school on our campus that was started 3 years ago, the High School for American Studies. I'm very proud of that particular school. We have a very close affiliation with the Celia Cruz Bronx High School of Music, which is located right here at Walton High School next to us. And we have a number of other affiliations that I think are going to create students that are going to be much better prepared to go to college and get an education, which is going to be an absolute requirement for anyone in the decades ahead. A college education I'm talking about. Well, I think there are, a good number of young people who are competing in the real world. The world, has changed. I think we've become a much more visual culture. I'm concerned that I see a lot of young people who don't like to read, who don't read very much. They watch a lot of TV. They watch a lot of images. Their writing skills are very limited. In some cases, downright poor. We see it in our students when they come here. This is not about intelligence. These students are very smart, but they just haven't acquired the habits of intellect and the habits of writing that they're going to need if they're going to succeed. So we stress that a lot here, because in a way, sometimes when I've talked to students, they say, well, I don't like to write. And I say, well, look, writing, you may not like to write, and I'm not asking you to become a novelist or a newspaper reporter, but writing well means that you know how to think well. And if you don't know how to think well, you won't be able to express your ideas, you won't be able to communicate. And that's the reason why you learn how to write. And some accept that more than others, and some, move and do what they have to do and become, effective professionals. They're wonderful communicators. I don't know if you can, if it's wise to characterize, a whole group, with such a broad stroke. There is a great deal of single families among Puerto Ricans, single parent homes, maybe among the highest among all of the Hispanic groups. And that has some real consequences in terms of the poverty levels of a lot of those children and a lot of the households in which they grow up. I think the Hispanic population, there are significant differences across groups. I think what is needed is clearly a solid education background. That is a foundation for success and being able to make your way ahead in American society. And to the extent that we can provide that to young kids as they grow up, I think we will be giving them and enabling them to at least have the possibility of becoming more successful. There is certain levels of dependency. You could argue, I've seen some people argue the same thing about the African American community, that there's a lot of dependence and there's welfare and there's this and there's that. To be sure, there's some of that, but on the other side, there's a lot of success, and there are a lot of other people who have come out of that poverty, who have worked hard, who have made life better for their children, and their children have succeeded. So it's a generational analysis that is needed, and some groups come in very poor, immigrants, then their children do a little better, and then finally maybe the grandchildren or some of those children are able to go and become professionals and do extremely well. We had some very strong successes across the Hispanic community, including the Puerto Rican community. So, I would not necessarily characterize the situation, in such terms. This was part of the plan of the government of Puerto Rico to sort of export surplus labor after the war, and a lot of Puerto Ricans migrated in the late 40s, early 50s, with the help of the government that had set up offices in different places. So I remember reading a study about the origins of the Puerto Rican population written in 1953 by a professor of sociology at Marquette. The first study that I ever had read about that. I didn't know that Puerto Ricans had got there that early. And they're still there. But the conditions of education there were very difficult. The students were isolated. There were no bilingual programs at all. In fact, those were the early days of a struggle to get bilingual education approved. And I was invited, and I got involved in some of those studies as part of my involvement with the National Association for Bilingual Education. And then locally, we pushed to get a bill approved by the Wisconsin State Legislature, which they approved it in 1976. They finally passed a Bilingual Education Act, which continues to this day to provide some funds for programs in this area.